Hello, and welcome to a new episode of the BIMvoice podcast. My name is Petru, and today I have the pleasure to talk with someone whom I think plays a very important role regarding the BIM adoption across the United Kingdom and probably across the world as well. He is a data and digital transformation specialist and ISO 19650 BIM tutor. Welcome, Steven Eglinton.
Thank you, and welcome, and thanks for having me.
I'm really excited about this talk. Let's start by telling us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So my name is Steven Eglinton. I'm based in the UK. I work mainly in London. I have 20 years experience of managing information. So originally my background is in geospatial, so geographic information systems particularly, and managing that kind of information, map-based information. And now I am a consultant in information management, and not all of it, but large parts of that often are called BIM, and that's, I guess, what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, that's true. You are involved in many initiatives and organizations, like more companies, right, and British Standard. And can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So the training or just the standards?
No, just like a short brief through all these things or initiatives or organizations you are involved with.
Involved with, yeah. So
Yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah, I'm involved with several companies. I work for the sort of my main company, which is called GeoEnable. So that's the consultancy I mainly work with. As the name suggests, we have a background in geospatial, GIS, and we have a sub brand now called BIM Enables. So that's certainly focused on BIM and information management and wider what we're calling sort of digital transformation, digital engineering, digital construction, digital twins, so more focused on that. So that's the consultancy vehicle, if you like. I also teach, I'm also a professional tutor in BIM, particularly the ISO 19650 BIM standards on behalf of the Institution of Civil Engineers, which is obviously based in the UK. I also teach on behalf of the BSI, the British Standards Institution across the world when I'm required. So I've done that for several years now, a few years. And I also teach for the Chartered Institute of Building. I'm a guest tutor there. So, and there's other organizations I teach, but I think the common theme there is it's all around the BIM standards. And what particularly interests me is I'm often talking to people who have no background in managing information. So I'm used to speaking with people with very, very, very different skills. Just to quickly give you some more background, I'm a fellow of the British Computer Society. I'm a fellow of the British Cartographic Society. So I've got sort of certainly a mixed sort of IT background, but often I'm more involved in sort of business change now. And just to finish my background, I guess, and maybe we will come back to it, certainly I got involved heavily in information management in engineering and construction when I used to work at the London Underground as a permanent employee. So I'm just mentioning that in case we don't get back to it, but that was sort of the big turning point for me, and become focused on sort of the engineering quality for information.
I understand. For those outside London, what is Underground London?
So London Underground is the metro system in London. So there you go, or the rapid transit system, which is what we tend to call it officially globally. So the train, so the underground train. So in the UK, particularly in London, we'd normally call it the tube. So if by mistake I call it the tube, it's not by mistake, that's the nickname for it. So the equivalent in New York is obviously what they call the subway. So it's our metro system.
Yeah.
And the first in the world.
Okay, I understand. Okay, let's go from somewhere basic. What is your definition of BIM? And before you start, from a previous talk we had, I know you have two definitions. You have one official, like standard interpretation of BIM, and the more holistic one. Please start with the standard one, and after that, if you can pivot to the other one as well.
Sure, absolutely. So there's different definitions depending who you ask. So certainly the concepts and principles that I would identify with are more encompassing, and they are captured now in the international standard series ISO 19650, ISO 19650, and they approach BIM as a whole life approach to managing information for assets, so physical assets. So I see BIM in through the eyes of these standards. So it's more about clearly managing information at all phases. So not only the design, the construct, which most people are focused on, but through into the operational use of the asset and the potential decommission or repurpose. So it's a whole. So I'm simplifying it here because obviously there's a standard which describes it, but essentially it's about a whole lifetime approach to managing information about the built environment and built assets. And these standards are originally from the UK, or the precursor standards, should I say, and which were called BS and PAS, 1192, 1192. So it's more about information management, and it's not just about construction. And a lot of people, so that's what I understand BIM to be, and I'm a sort of practitioner in information governance, information management, so that works for me. There's a lot of people who interpret BIM not wrongly, because it's always what it used to be, and certainly is for a lot of people, as far as 3D modeling or 4D modeling, which would have time. And that's originally where the terminology comes from. So it's not that they're wrong, it's that the scope is different, their focus. And certainly 3D models and 4D, 5D models are part of the key information deliverables. So it's a question of scope. It's a question of, if you're talking about a thing, as in a model, that would be the more traditional interpretation, or you're talking about a process or an activity or an approach, which is more what we mean in the international standards now.
I see. Yes, this is one of the challenges I have regarding the 3D model. And like you said, it's a very important part of BIM, the 3D model, of course, but it's incomplete. Would be incomplete to think at the whole approach only as the 3D model.
Absolutely. And it's perspective, and it's time. It's not only I say scope as in breadth of what we're looking at as in a physical sense, rather than a building. I'd be looking at potentially, depending who I'm talking to, all of, for example, the rail sector, potentially, depending who the client is and what the conversation and what we're focused on. So rather than a bridge, the scale and scope absolutely depends. It could be all of the infrastructure. It could be a school or all schools in a whole country, depending on the approach. But it's certainly delivered and focused at a project level. That's how you would capture the information typically. So certainly it is focused on a project level, at least at this point in time. And that's where a lot of information is generated. But certainly we're seeing more of a focus on the maintenance and potentially capture of information of existing assets, existing infrastructure. And that's sort of a growth area where I think we need to focus more.
Yeah, a very ignored or not prioritized area so far. Yeah. And not only for old projects. I think this is still a challenge for the new project as well. I don't think the focus is still there, like to require documentation that is going to be used in the future.
Yeah, and I think people do what they're asked. I think that's the other reflection. Because I've always managed information, I've always looked at the bigger if people keep talking about the bigger picture, but I'm going to say it as well, the bigger picture, the end game, if you like. So people say start with the end in mind and all these kind of things around BIM, around the management of the information. Well, it depends who you are. If you work in a project and that's what you get paid to focus on, you should be focused on the project. that is your job. If you're a project manager, please focus on the project. And please focus on the project requirements and deliver, and they'll be physical. And now we have clearer definition around the digital requirements or the digital deliverables, which have always been there, but maybe not as precise as we needed. So, it depends who you talk to. Should a project manager on a building, should they be focused on the whole of all of the buildings within that company's portfolio? No, because that's not their job, but they should do what they're asked. So I think certainly the focus for me, and as in this is what we need through the standards, and this is what we want, is the client or whoever's commissioning the work, they need to ask. You get what you ask for. So BIM is about making sure, particularly the client asks for what they need. And what they want, and that this is a challenge for some people because it's not been thought through fully in the past, perhaps.
Yeah, you are right about that. And how do we? What can we do about this? Because if someone is just comfortable to have a set of requirements for a project, they did it like take a municipality or something. They do it in a specific way, right? And we want to change. We want to do it better. But how should we approach this? How we break the ice?
So how we change? I guess it's like with anything. So I intentionally didn't go into too much detail when you asked me what BIM is, because it means, obviously it's in the standards. It means different things to different people. Certainly, people talk about collaboration a lot and change management or digital transformation. But that is a core part of it. We need to change the way we work, and it's happening. But how do we get people to change? We have to make it desirable and part of the normal way of working. So in my mind, BIM, there's a parallel with health and safety practice, for example. So clearly BIM can add value to health and safety. That's not what I'm talking about. I understand that. I'm talking about a conceptual parallel where, particularly in the UK, as I'm sure in other countries, but particularly in the UK, we're quite focused with health and safety, and people often joke about it, but it's obviously very good, and we've increased, particularly since the 1970s, and particularly in the construction sector, improved safety dramatically. And it's because a way of working and a safe way of working and safe practices and risk mitigation is part of the culture. So we have training, there's things in place like CDM, which is the regulation around it, CDM 2015. But the point being, we've changed the way we think, right? So even me as an untrained person in health and safety, I would know through the culture and environment in which I work if things are unsafe. It's a cultural, it's a way of doing things. It's everybody knows enough, and where people need focus training, they have it if they're in charge of a site. So why I'm talking about health and safety is it's sort of ingrained, embedded in the way we do work, and I think that's will be the biggest turning point, and it's starting to happen with how we use information, data, digital deliverables, where it becomes the norm. It's just the expectation, and it's slowly happening. So for example, we can quote the standards with BIM. I suspect most people couldn't quote any of the standards with regard to health and safety, but they do the things that are required because it's part of the way they do their business. Do you see what I mean? So BIM succeeds digital when it's just how we do things, and that's where we are with some sectors, for sure, and maybe not quite where we are in other sectors, for example, the built environment. So that's how we change. We change by working differently and behaving differently and asking for different things of people. And I think we're certainly getting there. There is a change.
Yeah. So you mentioned before that it's important for the clients
Yes.
to get to a level where they can get requirements, right? So this is a very important requirement for BIM adoption to flourish, right? To get to the next level. Do we have any other areas that we are struggling with? Like if you look at the entire supply chain or all the stock uh, stakeholders involved in the building process?
Yeah, I guess because, like I said in my introduction, maybe not half, but some of my time, let's say a third of my time, is teaching, is professionally tutoring people through sort of the BIM standards. It's, I guess, to some extent, I'm not surprised in the sense that people need help because that's why I'm there. They've chosen to come on a course, but so I guess in some way, bizarrely, it's hard for me to tell what the industry is like as a whole because I interact more with people who want to change. They're either paying me for advice as a consultant because they want to change, or they've come active within reason. It's actively come on a training course. But as far as the supply chain, it is, you could argue that's changed faster. Again, most of my experience would be particularly in the United Kingdom. So, but because there is to be quite frank, there'd be a commercial advantage for what we would call a tier one or, perhaps a main contractor or a consultancy. There is let's say everything's equal, which it isn't, but let's pretend for example, I'm a client and I could commission physical construction work from several companies, for example. One of the criteria that, if not now, in the near future, would potentially be a discriminator above, let's say, all things being equal, it could be the digital services they offer me, because it's an investment. So I think what's happening is the contractors, the large contractors particularly, they have seen a advantage. They have seen a commercial benefit. They have, for example, consistency across their own projects, how they monitor their own projects, how they share knowledge across their own projects, learnings across their own projects. So they've been quite fast. I've worked with, several, I was going to say a few, but several companies at that level. So big sort of companies. So they see it. I think the big challenge is then, if it does offer a commercial advantage, we're not necessarily hearing loads about where the benefits are because they're commercial benefits in the private sector. But yes, certainly people are doing it. I've luckily got some first-hand experience of that. There's certainly the government's driving it in the UK. But I think that the challenge is we need more examples, we need more case studies, we need more sharing of best practice, and it is happening. It is happening now, more than it has been.
I see. But this standard, the BIM standard, 19650, it's not mandatory, right? It's just something that companies could or might implement, but it's not a requirement for like a general requirement, right?
That's right. So it'd be the client. So most of the activity in the UK is the client, which in the broader context in the UK has been the government in a lot of the case studies. So the central UK government, as a customer, as a client, they would be requiring it, if I can talk, within their contract framework. So that's how BIM works in the UK. It doesn't have to be private. That's just an example and where we've typically focused with case study. So you get what you ask for, and the client is asking for it. There's no regulation at this point. It's likely there will be. I don't have any first-hand experience, but it's very likely that the first experience of where BIM might be in some kind of regulation or legislation within the UK may be around fire regulation in following the Hackett review. So the Grenfell Tower fire. Now there's Hackett review came out, which made recommendations around having what we're calling a golden thread. So this common theme of information, like a minimum requirement for information. that persists through the life of a product or a system, so a wall system, for example. And it's very clearly to do with fire and safety. So it's likely that would become some kind of regulation, but at this point in time, that's not the case. So it is the client asking, and it's for the client, therefore, to check they're getting what they're paying for. That's how BIM works here.
I see. What about the clients that you have? How do they feel after? Do they feel urged to try to adopt this? Do they see the value in embracing this new mentality?
Yeah, so I mean, again, it might be a slight bias in the sense that people will have approached me because they want to change. I don't tender or anything. I'm not trying to convince people to change. If I work through industry bodies, then for reasons that are not commercial, certainly I'm interested in trying to communicate with people to convince them. But it's people quite rightly are conforming to government recommendations and policies and best practice. So there's been lots of sort of reports and good work from the central UK government around, so for example, data for public good and things like this. So the National Infrastructure Commission, for example, is a government-funded yet independent body of the central UK government that provides national infrastructure strategic recommendations to the UK government. And again, they've been focused on this. We have something called the Centre for Digital Built Britain in the UK with the University of Cambridge and a department called BIMvoice. So my point being, there's a lot of activity, there's a lot of momentum, there's a lot of best practice and research effort gone into it. So people are following, they're following that lead. So we certainly have the government, which is very fortunate, and why no doubt I'm talking to you, because we have the government leading by example with this, and that's where people are following that example. And that's how it's That's how it's working. The government is practicing what it's preaching, and it's working. Things will take time, but we're seeing things go in the right direction.
When you say government,
yes,
you mean like from a legal standpoint, they put out these laws, or you mean by the authorities, by the buildings governments of the United Kingdom or something?
Yeah, so it's on multi levels, I guess. It would be so in April 2016 there was what people commonly refer to as a BIM mandate, but there's something called BIM Level 2, which I guess I won't get into the details. People can look that up if they're interested. BIM Level 2, but it was a minimum requirement of expectation of information delivered during a newly funded construction project. So the government is doing this research. There are things going on. There's sort of top level activity around BIM and digital twins and digitalization and digitization of that. But in addition, each government department should be asking for BIM in their own construction project. So if a department X or department Y is building a new, let's say, school, for example, or let's say a flood defense, they will be asking for a BIM methodology and some kind of data deliverables, which use an open format. Again, I don't know how much detail people want to go into, but as far as data deliverables, we're focused certainly at this stage on COBie. So it's an exchange schema. It's a way of it's a common way of getting data that I can reuse in a machine readable format. So again, there's lots of sort of tools, if you like, and ways of doing it, but there's certainly the central government, as in originally the Cabinet Office, and then BEIS, which is the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, has put out strategies. Government construction strategy, for example, in 2011 was one of the first ones to talk about in that way, and it's sort of policy level, saying we will do this, this is the expectation for every government department by April 2016. The expectation is every government department will. Do you see what I mean? So they will be asking for BIM in the manner that I'm describing, which is the process, during their construction projects. And it's quite clear, it's there in black and white, and it was published openly in 2011, saying that's the expectation.
How well did that went?
Well, I mean, I've actually been directly involved to some extent later on, not at that early stage. So I guess, can't say too much in the sense of what sort of reporting what departments are doing. But the open fact is that it's going definitely in the right direction, for sure. I mean, each year, we've been looking, we, as in the government, not me directly, looking at the trends of spend on capital expenditure of construction projects, and it's going in the right direction. So how do we do things more efficiently, to save costs, frankly, more efficiently, and where do we get savings? How do we look at things like off-site fabrication? We're talking about modern methods of construction now, which maybe we'll get onto, that's sort of more than BIM, if you like. This is happening. So it is going in the right direction. So how well is it going? Well, it's going well. Things can't change overnight, particularly because of practicalities like contract frameworks, for example. So if you have a framework, a legal framework for subcontractors, for example, they can't all change overnight. There can't be a new expectation. So as contract frameworks have come up for renewal, BIM, in the sense that I mean, is being put in them. And I either had first-hand experience or, say, second-hand experience in the sense that I've been working with people that are doing it. It is going in the contracts, frameworks. And then the contractors and subcontractors that work on these frameworks will be, and have to, work in a way that conforms to the expectation of the BIM standard. So it is happening. So it is working. It is happening. So that's a fact. But obviously things won't happen overnight. So again, it's a journey. It takes time. Anything of change at scale takes time. And if everything did happen overnight, there'd be huge risks in making big changes wholly to every department in one go. This is not the way to do it. Even if that could be done overnight, you could flick a switch and we had infinite budget to do so, there's very big risks with that. Again, that's probably my background in managing information. Generally, you don't change everything overnight. As we need to change, like with the contract, you make the changes at that point, and this is an appropriate and measured and appropriate way to approach it. So that's what I would expect.
I see. So the things are actually going slower than expected. So maybe we have been a little bit too optimistic about.
Well, expected from whom? Not from me. No. So if you, that wasn't what I said there. I said no, they're going as planned. I would suggest there was always. I don't know if you're familiar with the BIM wedge. Sure. Yeah, the main. So again, without going, people can look that up, can't they, for the detail? Without going into the detail, the whole point of that was we are on a journey. That's the whole.
I know. I meant only by 2016. But they are doing it. So 2016 was all new projects. So not projects underway. So all. And are they doing it? Yes, they are doing it. So yes. So would everyone? So when I say everyone, I mean every private sector. I mean every government department. Some departments don't build a lot as well, because obviously people think about the sort of infrastructure or people who build the departments that build schools. They are doing it. There are some departments that just don't build lots of things. They have offices. So when I talk about departments, I don't just mean infrastructure. It could be departments. Government departments that just have offices and don't, or maybe places where the general public go, citizens go, that they maybe don't build a lot. So again, it would be, they might change when their frameworks come up for renewal. So I think that's where we need to be clear. It's covering everything that's infrastructure, every department that's not infrastructure that you wouldn't think
is in scope that simply would only need to use office blocks. They're in scope as well for their own infrastructure. So yeah, and they can't all change overnight. That's that they might have outsourced things. They might have different contract frameworks.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot to digest. It's a lot to coordinate, and yeah, make sure it
It's
works.
scale. Yes, this is a national scale, and it's every sector, every domain, every skill set, every So I think it's been a success, and I'm not saying that from absolutely it's been a success, and then certainly the international standards that have grown from the original sort of UK activity have also in that way been a success, because that was the hope was they would be grown upon and built upon, and they have done. They're now international standards.
I see. What would be for you an ideal process from planning to using, maintaining, and maybe demolish it or reuse it later? To what level should we need to get, and in how many years do you think we will get there?
Well, some people are doing it already. So again, it depends on scale. Does that make sense? So some people, I think the challenge is some people already do what we're describing in BIM. I think it's just that we don't. So for example, some utilities or energy production, for example, some sectors within energy will already be doing modeling, like plant, for example, where there's generators, for example, and turbines. They would already do the concepts of what we're talking about, maybe under a different name years ago, and they call it product lifecycle management, and manufacturing does it. So some people are doing it already. I guess your question was, when will everybody be doing it? I don't know is the answer. It would, and also it will even. I mean, to some extent, there's no end in that way. I think that's why we've moved away from the levels in the UK more. We certainly had sort of level 2, and people talk about level 3, which is not defined. So you can't be achieving level 3. We haven't defined it. The UK government's not defined it. It's a continuous journey, isn't it? It's a digitalized journey. So when will it be finished? It will never be finished, because BIM should hopefully have continuous improvement at the core of it. If we're in essence, if we're gathering lots of information consistently to help us make decisions and collaborate and work in a smarter way, and maybe re-engineer the processes and the way we manufacture buildings rather than construct buildings, depending how you look at it, it should be a continuous, virtuous improvement cycle. Or we've missed the point, because we should be learning. So in that way, we'll never been done. But as far as getting to the minimum requirement, some people already have achieved this. I think that's the challenge. Some people are already doing it. Some people are not doing it.
Yeah, I understand. I understand what you say. I might not have formulated this well enough, because I have in mind some challenges that I see in bigger projects, especially.
Yeah.
Regarding the silos and inefficiencies, like you said, like some plants maybe are easier because you have the owner and they coordinate everything, right? But when you have bigger projects and you have so many teams involved and so many actors in the process, I see that as a very, like, there are many things that you can say and pick up and say, yeah, this is a very inefficient way to do it. From this point of view, I was referring, like, when we will get to how long it will take until we'll get to a level where we can actually all the stakeholders will be in the same place, talk the same language, and work like to achieve the same goal.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think it's challenging because, like, I guess what I said at the beginning, if BIM is successful, it might be that the paradox is we might not be talking about it. in that way. So, for example, if I often work in the rail sector. Do I need everyone on a project? So, for example, let's say everything goes as I want. Let's say I'm in charge of the BIM or the information management activity. If it was a very successful project in that specific element of the information is understood by the client and the whole throughput of information from creation to use to monitoring, checking, validation, would I expect everybody to understand BIM? No, not at all. By name. Maybe you could argue either way, because I'm sure at this point in time I probably would, because it'd be good for their career and they et cetera, et cetera. But in time, let's say in 3, 4, 5 years, do we need to be talking about BIM by name? Maybe not, because let's say I'm helping the client, I would be procuring a model, an information model, in a broader sense, not just a 3D model. And providing I get that, and the processes are embedded within my working practice, within the information systems I use, and the checks are part of our working regime, that would be a success to me.
Yeah, of course, because it would be the new status quo. Sorry.
Exactly. No, it's fine. Yeah, no, so I agree. But then in, let's say in 5 years' time, would I then be holding BIM or digital twin training classes? I don't know. I mean, the standard will have the name in it, and that's absolutely fine. And that's like I see BIM as the minimum requirement, if that makes sense. It's the starting point for getting the basics right, so everyone's on the same, if you like, benchmark. They're on the same level. It would be then the effort should begin. Like, then the clever things should begin, in the sense of, then what do we do with the data? Then we're talking about dashboards, or we're talking about analytics, data analytics. We should be talking about machine learning, artificial intelligence, big data. That's the next step, which should be done in parallel. What do we do with the data? If we get all this data, which we're getting, what should we do with it? How do we exploit it? How do we learn from it? How do we do modeling in the broader sense of data modeling? How do we do modeling? So and I think that's the challenge why I can't answer your question directly, because all of that in my mind is the same picture, if that makes sense. As soon as I think everyone's doing the minimum requirement, which is fulfilling ISO 19650, immediately I'm certainly interested then in the analytical side of it, the use of the data, which is certainly, the use of the data isn't defined within that standard. Then we'd have another standard.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, some places here. I mean, let's say, I guess what you're looking for is how long. Well, I don't know. Maybe 5 years for everybody. I mean, I just don't know. It just depends.
Yeah, I see. Like exactly what you say. Like, this minimum BIM understanding and the implementation is like, it's like common sense, right? Why it takes so many decades to implement it?
Well, so I completely agree with you. So I guess back to one of my first comments was, people do what they're asked to do. So again, it's a way of working. People ask about the supply chain. Again, I'm quite focused on the client. Again, that's where I think it's quite good that in the UK we're focused on the client, and in this case particularly the government as a client. You get what you're asked for. So let's, in my world, that's why I like digital twin as well, and maybe we won't talk about it in too much detail, but the concept, if I have a digital representation or the data or information, I should be checking it. I should be validating it. If just for one moment I say, well, how do I check the physical deliverable? Let's say a bridge. How is it checked? How is it validated? How do I test the materials that it's made of? How am I confident in the safety of it? I'd look at the specifications that I give when I commission a bridge, for example, the requirements, the load capacity of it, for example, load bearing capacity, the size, the dimensions. I might have learnings from previous structures that have been built. So all of this is a specialist domain, civil engineering, right, and structural engineering. they're professionals. And even then you have subdomains. So as far as creating the digital model, and at the moment we're using language like BIM, which is fine, and that's the standard. I would want people with the same kind of skills that focus on the checking. They understand what they should be checking, the quality, all these aspects from the physical world in the digital world. I don't think generally we're quite there yet, in the sense that we talk about data science as something separate to BIM. As far as the standard, it is, but in my mind, we need to work closer together. We need data scientists to be part of the conversation.
This is very important. I really would like to come back to talk about this exactly after I ask you this, the closest question,
sure.
Which is when we think about using a BIM 3D model, like design it and use it afterwards all the time, like that is called a BIM 3D model, right? And what is the difference between, I don't really understand, to be honest, the difference between BIM 3D model and digital twin. What is the purpose and what is the difference between two concepts?
So certainly digital twin is a representation. I mean, in the sense, there'd be one document that's worth reading called, from the UK, Gemini Principles. So it's got the concepts and principles around. In the UK, they're building, focused on building a national digital twin. There's a national digital twin program. So that's something to look at. And Gemini Principles is one of the key documents that's come out of that to date, plus others at this point. But what's the difference? So a 3D model is simply 3D. So because, again, I've said it many times now, I have an information and data background. There are lots and lots and lots of data, or metadata, as well as data or parameters or attributes. So in a GIS background, I would talk about attributes of let's say it is a building that you can't see. So they're not three-dimensional. So for example, it could be the cost of something, it could be the material type, it could be potentially hundreds of things that. So particularly having a GIS background, we're quite used to linking information, so and we're quite familiar with the fact that you see it, and traditionally it would have been 2D, now it's also 3D on a map. If I click on it, if I interact with feature, we'd call it a feature, and I guess we'd call it an object now, it would be pulling data potentially from other data sources and doing analysis, and probably fairly detailed analyses, multivariant analysis, possibly on tens, who knows, on hundreds of variants. That's quite normal, particularly for, like I say, GIS. It's that kind of mindset which is what we're trying to get people to understand, the use of a digital twin. So a 3D model, I guess my question would be, what other attributes are in there? 3D is
exactly
another dimension. I might want another 50 or 100 pieces of data to make that valuable. And sorry, and just to finish, because I have more just an infrastructure background, it's very unlikely that they would be in that model. So if you think of a neat building, and you might want to put things in that model in the 3D sense that you described. In my mind, particularly with infrastructure, we wouldn't have a model. I'm not going to have a model of a railway. I'd have models. And the other thing is, it's likely that they would not have all the information in there for safety reasons, for confidentiality reasons, for performance reasons. Do you see what I mean? So I'd be linking. I might be linking to a cost database. So that's where, if you think of that concept of linking things together in a system of systems or networks, things linked together in an information sense as well as a physical sense, because that's how infrastructure works. That's where we're more moving with digital twins. It's more about connectivity.
What would that be? A common data environment, or?
I mean, common data environment is defined and described in the ISO 19650 standard. So that has a quite clear definition as far as the standards. that's something broader than the definition within. I mean, you could just say yes, it could be, and it would fulfill some of the requirements. It would probably be broader than the definition currently within the standard. So for example, in use, I'm often focused in use. I realize a lot of people interested in BIM are in the design and construction phase, and often I work, or at least traditionally, more in the operational, the use of the asset. In which case, we might use different language. So on a pure IT level, the concept around managing information and not having duplication, having a master set, some people talk about single source of truth, we call that master data management, or MDM. So what would I call the system? I'm not sure is the answer. It depends. It would fulfill common data environment functionality. It might be an ecosystem. It might be a system of systems. But it's probably going to be something broader than the current definition. But the concepts and principles would align with what in pure IT we call master data management, and that's a mature, well understood concept from at least 30 years ago. So, and that's what we're delivering through BIM. BIM gives us things that already exist, often in the IT sector, at its core, but with the language, appropriate language and framework to implement them in the built environment sector, which we've been lacking.
Yeah, this sounds so much complexity right here, and this is a problem. How can we get this simpler so everybody would like to be more willing to take the jump to learn more about this?
Yes.
Because I think this scares a lot of people, the complexity things, right?
I think it's at scale. So scale, I'm used to very large scale, I guess, but it's for everything to me, I see it as, I guess I'll never use the word modular, but I guess that's how I see it, sort of chunking things down. So for example, again, if I just stick to rail for a minute, people say, oh, how good, let's say the level of definition or the level of detail, or what's the precision or accuracy that you need in the rail sector.
Yeah.
And let's talk about a 3D model just for a minute, like measured survey that would give me a 3D model. Again, that's not, I can't answer that question because it depends on the asset group. Are you talking about civils assets like bridges and tunnels? Are you talking about signals? Are you talking about track? Are you talking about overhead line, the electrical pickup? That's what makes a difference. So even one sector like rail isn't a sector because there's also telecommunications.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? So the question should be more precise. It should be, can you tell me the specification level of information need, now we call it, in the international BIM standard? What do you need your information to do? What decisions do you need to make with this information in that asset group at this point in time? And that's where people simply haven't, either they haven't thought it through, or it's in their mind. We need to get it on paper. And that's why I keep talking about processes. The reason is, in my mind, we need to map processes, as in, where does the information come from currently, who uses the information, what decisions. So it's all to enable decision making. And until we understand them fully and in more detail, things don't progress. They progress slowly. So it's about decision making. Who has to make decisions? How critical are the decisions? Why are they making decisions? That's what it's about. That we are facilitating them decisions.
I see. I might stumble a little bit too much on the words of BIM, building information, the original definition, right? Because building information management or better management came later, right? In the start, we had this was the first definition maybe coined, right? And maybe I stumbled too much on the modeling, which clearly says it's not model, it's modeling, how you shape the information, right?
Okay, so even modeling, and this is where I'm quite not amused, but I often play on this when I'm teaching to hopefully make it clear, is even modeling is interpreted. So for example, because I have a information management background, if you said modeling to me, even now, I would immediately think more about data modeling. So weather modeling. So, for example, so if I talk about weather modeling, people don't think of a 3D model. They think of some kind of data model and things occurring because originally I have more an environmental background. So I would think even now, out of context, if someone said modeling, it's more likely I'd immediately think of that, something more complex. And then if someone specified, oh no, actually I'm creating perhaps a 3D model, then I'd say, oh, okay. So it depends where people are coming from. So in the standards, the international standards, when we talk about models as a noun rather than modeling, and we do mean the whole collection of information. So we talk about asset information model, project information model, or PIM, and we mean all of it. So it would be 3D models, it would be specifications, it could be health and safety material, it could be photographs. Let's say photographs are used for signing off for particular milestone or gates to sign things off. That would all be in scope, and then that collectively and hopefully connected, linked to each other through the, sort of a database type concept. That's modeling, and the whole thing is an information model, and that's what we mean in the standards. And 3D is a part of it. So it's quite challenging in that way, where we've even architecture, just slightly changing it. I often work and have worked as a solution architect, or a senior solution architect, or an enterprise architect. So they have been on some contracts and consultancy. Now these are obviously IT or information management type names, but it's even interesting that if someone says architect to me, yeah. I would not immediately, even though obviously I work with architects, I wouldn't immediately think of someone building a building. I would have to double check, because I am often an information architect. Or do you see me? So even these fundamental concepts, we in IT, we have reused the words.
Yeah.
But for a long time, mind you, information architects are.
And without thinking like how these words were being used in the construction industry, and
well, the thing is, at the time, it was intentional, because it is sort of paying a compliment to the complexity, obviously, of architecture and design. We design information systems. So you use words like design. Design is used in that sense. But I guess traditionally, the same people wouldn't be in the room, though. So this is what BIM gives us. It gives us this good, if you like, conflation. We are now putting people together that traditionally would almost certainly never have been together in the same room. So we just have to be careful. But it's a good thing that we're talking, right? So we can iron out these challenges around common language. That it's not infinitely complex to do that. We just have to be careful.
Yeah, I never thought about this actually. Like if you've been involved a little bit with programming, if you have a little bit idea about how this works, like maybe that would be a reason why I see 3D BIM models, like with all the information they need to have there, not only like 3D dummy models, if you can put it that way, right? Maybe it's a little bit too broad definition, but I think this is the true definition, right? Of
Yes. Well, it's not that. So I mean, you're asking me directly, so I'm saying, right? But normally I wouldn't force these conversations. It has to be meaningful to people.
Yeah.
Let's say, I know obviously we're talking about BIM, which is good. And this has got me to in sectors perhaps, and in conversations where I wouldn't have been years ago. But let's just pretend BIM didn't exist as a term. It would even be harder, I think, to have these conversations. So for example, some people have challenges around, we want data and information to be machine readable. This is one of the core concepts about commonality, structured data, and of course there's unstructured data, but ideally I want structured data to have automate things, make it machine readable, look at patterns, trends, etc., etc. Now, the fact that there might be some challenges around that, and maybe there is a skills gap with some people, okay, I appreciate that. But the fantastic thing is I'm having that conversation. So I will be in front of people, almost certainly, let's say in a consultancy role, I wouldn't have been talking, let's say 10 years ago, to people about how we call components of a bridge. It's some people, but not at a data level. I might have been, but it would have been, let's just say it would have been a harder conversation, you know? So these conversations have to be had. You know, how do we define the elements of for example, a bridge? I keep going to rail there, but we're having these conversations, and it won't happen overnight. And I have an in, and the in, if you like, is BIM, but there's work to be done. Some of the railway exists for 200 years. You know, the London Underground is 100 years. These things are not new. These assets are not new. We need to appreciate the fact of what's already occurred and be appropriate when we try and implement information systems.
Yeah, maybe I'm thinking maybe the technological development in the last years, like the last decade that happened, was a little bit like something that pushed us to try to wish to implement this in every other sectors in our lives, right? Like what happened with everything with data with all these companies. But so going back to the digital twin, so now maybe this term was coined by people that got stuff to try to explain each time. A 3D BIM model is something that has all the information. So now, but for me, I still don't see any difference. Like my definition of 3D BIM model is the same. What you say, it's a digital twin. I don't see any difference there.
Well, no, so it's a representation. So it could be that a digital twin has no graphical.
Okay.
I mean, that would be. So is there a hard definition at this point in time? Absolutely not. But it could be intentionally at this point in time. It's broad. So I might have a digital twin of transportation usage in, let's say, London. Would it necessarily have every bus stop micro detailed? No. But would it be fair for me to call it digital twin? Yeah, within what we're talking about at the moment. Yeah. So it's a representation. It's intentionally not hard and fast because, and also, like I said, in infrastructure particularly, you are not going to have everything in a model. That just isn't the case. It would be an ecosystem, an environment, a representation.
Yeah, I understand.
That makes sense. So it's more the ecosystem in which this digital twin lives. That's, if you like, the more important thing, the most important thing, having the infrastructure in all senses, in the IT sense, but also the governance around it, like the management of the information. That's what comes with it. Whereas a 3D model could exist on its own on my laptop in my home. That could exist there. Whereas what we want to have is something that's more like people say holistic, but more linked. And one of the other things is it's linked back to the physical. So certainly something we can absolutely agree on, and is that with regard to digital twin, it would have a feedback loop, if you like. So as in it's maintained, and it's likely we would have things like sensors. So how do we have a link from the digital to the physical and back again?
Yeah.
And I'm just saying and back again, but that's the bit that we've always been missing. Particularly when I speak from GIS, it's often been linear. You survey things, you maybe do CAD like design, then maybe traditionally I would be further down the chain, as in I might get the information and use it to do analytics. There wouldn't be this feedback loop, as in it wouldn't be the normal thing. So the critical thing is we're making it cyclical or a feedback loop or iterative. This is
and dynamic, live.
So it could be live. It could be, again, it doesn't have to be live. It could be, sure. But yeah, exactly. I think that's the day. Well, it's not. It's just then I'm just being measured in my responses, because then it's it could indeed be, and in a lot of cases it would be, but then that might not need to be the case. It might be weekly, yearly, and so annually or whatever it is. It's just an appropriate. It could be. So, for example, where the term has come from, and again, most people probably know this, but certainly originally from NASA, particularly, and other work from the US, the name digital twin, but certainly Formula One is another. Manufacturing, so the point being, manufacturing, aerospace, and others have used this name, this term, for a long time, decades. So the term is new to most people in the built environment sector. It is not a new concept at all in manufacturing, particularly in things like aerospace, super precise. They talk about it. It's just that we haven't had a systems approach to necessarily to all parts of the built environment. So it's simply a systems approach which has existed in other sectors for a long, long, long time. So someone didn't invent it but it's appropriate that we're referring to it, because that's how people think. So I talk about F1, and often an example, clearly a different sector, but often an example is the telemetry or the sensory equipment, and the data feed, which is the telemetry on a racing car, is in real time, in milliseconds feedback, because that's needed. Do we need that on everything? No. But would I want feedback on a heating system in a school? Yeah, I probably would, for various reasons. Would I need it every millisecond? No. Could be every day, could be every hour. Do you see what I mean? So it absolutely depends on the requirement. I think that's key, to be open about that and say, because often people don't like to say it depends. So a lot of my time I say, well, it depends. What do you need of the information, of your decisions? And I think a lot of people are nervous to say that. Things are not black and white. There's a spectrum. I see everything as a spectrum, as a scale, and everything has appropriate context. Maybe because originally my background's in environmental sort of biology or whatever, that I see context. I've always seen context, ecosystems, things in their place that are linked to things, and I'm very comfortable with that. I've never seen things in isolation. That's not the real world anyway. Things aren't in isolation in the real world.
Yeah, I see. Thank you very much for clarifying this for me. This was a very good explanation, and I really got the aha moment, and I understand now the difference.
Right.
And what actually, because I was thinking like, digital twin, it's a digital representation. When you say only this, I understand only digital representation, like a scan and you have it. It's digital representation, right? But not I did not know about the metadata and everything. You can have a lot of metadata in the 3D model as well, but maybe you can go even so far as you can include some dashboards as well, but you need to stretch yourself quite a lot. It would be much easier to have a system of systems, like you said.
And it depends what you're trying to answer. What is the question, or what is the decision? So, for example, if the decision is, what is it? Let's just say we're talking about heating or air cooling systems or whatever, air conditioning systems in a given building. The decision might be on their efficiency over a period of time. Now, you talk about dashboards, so some kind of analytics or business intelligence related to that. Now, the answer isn't showing me a 3D model in that instance. The answer is probably a graph.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like that's where the 3D will be a core part of it, and absolutely required by lots of people. But if I'm looking at the trending, or let's say life cycle, the degradation pattern. So when assets fail or their life, again, you can get these from the manufacturer. They would have an estimated life, for example. Analyzing that kind of information may or may not be relevant to its location. Often location is a factor, but nevertheless, the way I present that and analyze that, it's unlikely I'll be using 3D models to do that in that scenario. and that's even though I have a very, very, very strong sort of graphical and mapping background, it's actually these other potentially sort of non-graphical things that maybe excite me more, because that's where there's more scope for doing more deep analysis with data. It's not all graphical.
Yeah, sure. Haven't you dived yet in data science a little bit more?
Sure. In what sense?
Like
you're asking me
machine
if I've done
learning.
machine learning?
If
Yeah,
you go
sure.
back to that, because
Yeah.
I will the next episode I will publish. I had someone who actually is doing this, and he shared quite interesting things regarding this. And yeah,
Yeah, so physically myself, no, but likewise, I wouldn't typically be building a 3D model, for example, if that makes sense. So not physically, but have I been directly involved? Absolutely. So some clients who have been, looking at, so for example, just generically, year before last, I was helping a startup company in the UK, and they've been looking at and I was leading their sort of strategy around BIM and digital transformation, and obviously reuse of data. We were looking at planning applications, and so the likelihood of a planning application would succeed or not, given the geographic location, given other parameters. So that was all machine, and we were working with others to lead that. So that was all looking at machine learning and AI, and absolutely. So yeah, and I speak with people often that are doing it. Again, I've not done it myself, but I still see it as a tool. so it is quite exciting. It's like when laser scanning came out, and everyone does laser scanning. So point cloud model type creation. I think the challenge is, well, what are we going to do with it, or what are we looking for? So yeah, I've definitely been indirectly involved, and I'll talk about it a lot, and I understand its capability in a detailed level. I physically haven't done it myself, but I think we need to be absolutely clear what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do with it, and do we trust the data that we're using to train? So I think that's where BIM. So I think it's good for you to mention it, because I think that's where, if we talk about training sets, so information to train a model, where do we get the data from? So again, I think that's where coming at BIM, getting the basics right, the consistency, the repeatability, the trustworthiness with the information correct, sort of ongoing, this trust, I think is leads itself perfectly to what we're talking about, which is sort of AI machine learning, because you need repeatable, you want training sets of data. This is what we can get from repeatable, repeatable versions of data. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of perfect in that way. We know it would be structured in a certain way. So yeah, I think they need to be linked more together. So although that's very interesting, AI, even simple, or more simply talking about even just analytics and business intelligence, even in a more traditional sense, that's where I don't see them linked enough to BIM even now. So the representation of without even talking about machine learning and artificial intelligence, just linking analytics.
Yeah.
Because there are business intelligence professionals and a very, very, very mature business intelligence global capability that's probably being untapped as well in the context of what we're talking about. So I think we need to get them involved as well, and have that conversation as well as AI. People listen to AI as well, so this is where we need to.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Dalton, it was Dalton Goodwin, my previous guest, and he mentioned that his company started employing already data scientists.
Yeah, sure.
That's really interesting, and I think this it's going to be a requirement for every asset owner or company operating, because it's a really big function that we don't use it. We have so much data that we are collecting, and we don't use it. We just dump it there.
And I think things are developing. So I was working with the central UK government in 2017, 2018 to help them develop their capability around public asset registers. So that, what you were calling the digital national asset register, and the analytics capability is because I'm still in touch with my colleagues at the time. The capability around analytics, and I was more focused on getting the data in there and the approach to how we improve the governance around the information. But certainly the analytics capability is a core focus, and something that they're still developing. It's a lot more mature than when I was there, because it's a focus. So I think these skills often are very mature in other sectors. You look at insurance, finance, absolutely, pharmacological. So that's where it's quite interesting. You look at other sectors. So, for example, I often, again, give an example when I'm training as a joke, say, well, what's master data management? I'll say, well, put it this way. If I call up for a loan at any bank in the UK, they would know within seconds who I am, because there's a third party reference, and they'd either say yes or maybe no or whatever. But they wouldn't be, oh, we think it's this person. They would definitely know who I am, everything about me. So that concept, at least, is sort of, is underpinned by master data management principles. And that's what we need for our assets. So projects come, projects go. They're very significant in the fact that they create assets or buildings or infrastructure. That's very significant, but they come and go. And then certainly we talk about also interventions. So we do things to the asset or the whatever it is, the building. We maybe fix it, we maybe change the material, we maybe, whatever we do interventions. And then also in the BIM standards, we talk about event triggers. So things happen, events happen, things happen, and they trigger us to either want more information or, so it's these things we need to focus on over the life of the asset. What do we do with the asset? What might happen that's an external factor? So certainly some work I'm doing now is also focused on how plan resilience for assets, in relation to insurance of assets. So that's interesting as well.
Yeah.
When we need consistent information. So it's the same story.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. Do you see any way that machine learning and artificial intelligence won't disrupt and won't be integrated in our industry? Like people talk about BIM from 2005, maybe, I don't know, for 15 years, let's say, right? And we still struggle today to understand clearly and to different levels, right? Do you think is the same case here, or it's very well defined and much better used in other areas, and it's going to be easier to translate it to our crafts as well?
Well, so AI, like I say, people are already doing it. So even I've got first-hand experience of doing it. I'm certainly not an expert in these things. It's just another tool set. I think that's where I'd see perspective. It's not fair to say I distance myself. That sounds, because I'm deeply involved, but I keep a rational, measured approach to technology and trends, because they come and go, and language. So will it radically change things? Absolutely. Will we be talking about AI? Again, we already have it. So, for example, you look at consumer apps on your phone, or Amazon, or eBay or Netflix recommending, this is AI.
Yeah, sure.
Would people talk about Netflix having AI to recommend me films based on my profile and the time at which I'm watching films, and the trend, the minutiae metadata attributes that are pinned, attributed to each film, and then algorithmically suggest things? No one's having that conversation, but we use AI every day. So I think, will it change things? Absolutely. Has Netflix changed the way we consume films? Yes. Has Uber changed the way we have taxis? Yes. So has Amazon changed things? Has Google changed the way we search? Absolutely. when I talk about Google, would someone, a non-IT person, would they say, oh, that's because it has artificial intelligence and deep machine learning behind it? No, they would say it's a good search engine. And I think, so will it change things? Absolutely. Will people be talking about it? Will most people be talking about it? No way. Like they don't now. If I ask my dad can understand, he's not an IT professional, but he would understand Netflix and the fact that it's a streaming service and the fact that the convenience around it, etc. But the way it's working, I don't know how it works in that way, but he doesn't need to know. It recommends, and that's the parallel I draw there is with the built environment sector as well. These things are occurring. But people won't know. If it works perfectly, if it works seamlessly, rather, consumers don't think about it. And I think that's the paradox with a lot of modern IT. It works so well, you don't know it's working, and that's maybe a challenge sometimes.
Yeah, that makes sense. Are there any other tool sets or other exciting things happening in the AAC industry or
AAC? I mean, certainly, I guess things like immersive technologies, so things like augmented reality, projection, ways of consuming information is certainly of interest. And so, just virtual reality, for example, there are people, and again, I've tried it myself, and they're not tests. These are actually being used to teach people health and safety protocol on a work site, on a construction site, for example. So it'd be a simulation of maybe even a real construction site, and where for example, a crane might be, or some heavy machinery, and how they should navigate. These are being used today. So artificial intelligence sort of closes the loop as far as the human experience with the information, particularly around training, particularly health and safety. So you engage with the information, and therefore it puts the importance on the accuracy and appropriate level of information, detail and definition to how you're going to use the information. So certainly that I've seen a resurgence certainly in maps. So again, that's obviously most of my career, or certainly the background to my career, where there's a huge, if you like, resurgence in map visualization to simplify complex information. So we can talk about machine learning and big data and things like that, but one way of consuming it is often on a simplified map. So again, sort of things like GIS and these concepts are coming together. So I'm certainly familiar with Esri products, ESRI, which is the global leader in mapping software, and they've strategically partnered with Autodesk as well, which obviously are more traditionally focused on what people would have called CAD and AEC. So they're working together. It was a continuous sort of journey. So yeah, absolutely having that kind of link of the data. But what else is exciting? But certainly drones. Certainly things like drones or UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, or UASs, unmanned aerial systems, depending on what people want to call them. They are commonly being used. There's an event I'm on the organising committee called Geo Business. There's a plug for Geo Business here, which is in London each year. And I was lucky enough to chair that, I think, in 2017 now. But the point being, it's around geomatics, geomatics being survey. Yeah, absolutely, it's fascinating. We see drones there. We laser scanning. So certainly capture methods, as in survey capture, data capture, has come on a long way. And that still remains quite exciting. The way we can now use even just a smartphone, and we can create a 3-dimensional rendering of an object without using laser scanning. It uses, sort of the algorithmic modeling. So I find that absolutely fascinating. So the ability to create models in this sense, in this one, I do mean 3D models from simply nothing more than a smartphone, and then do measurements with it, that's absolutely fascinating. So I find that very engaging.
How accurate it is?
Well, I mean, it varies. So it would, at this point in time, it wouldn't be described as engineering quality. Right. So it depends again, because I see a spectrum. However, it may be fit. So you can still measure down to millimeters often. These things change so quickly, right? So at the time of recording, it would say millimeters, but it was even the same with laser scanning not so long ago that you would have to have been careful. But so you'd have to be very careful the precision and the accuracy required. But would I cut a hole in the ground based on it? Well, I mean, it depends. It depends how close you are to if there's anything under the ground or whatever. But you could certainly measure a volume of a room. You could measure walls appropriately, and that's often good enough. That is appropriate for what people want. And there's always going to be a scale, like a scale of precision versus cost versus accuracy. So people using drones with scanners on them, as in a laser scanner or LiDAR, as traditionally we'd call it. Often people are just using a drone or a UAV with just a normal camera basically on it, and processing the images to create a model. This can be done now.
Yeah. For professionals in AEC, for engineers, for architects, for everybody working in AEC industry, right?
Yeah.
For those who are interested to learn more about how our industry is going to be in the future, and to help maybe with BIM adoption, do you have any resources or any advice you would give for those who want to learn more and to become better at what they do?
Yes. So yes, certainly there's several places. Again, this is obviously I have a UK perspective, but there's a good resource in the UK. We have something called UK BIM Alliance, and they, in collaboration with the BSI, British Standards Institution, and the Centre for Digital Built Britain, have resources and guides, particularly on ukbimframework.org. So UKBIM framework.org, and there's resources there, and that's growing. So it's people like professionals like myself, for example, are active. So I've not authored any of the training material, just to say out there, but I've been involved in one of the subgroups which is affiliated with that, which is BIM for infrastructure over the years, and BIM for rail and things like this. But certainly a place to go on a website to read more is certainly UK BIM framework. There's generally, again from the UK, the Centre for Digital Built Britain, or CDBB. That's again a government-funded, in collaboration with the University of Cambridge, initiatives. They have lots of proof of concepts and initiatives to forward BIM and beyond what's BIM. So that's another place to look. So that's Centre for Digital Built Britain. And then something else which they're directly involved with and indeed leading is the we've got the UK. It's the National Digital Twin Programme. So if you search National Digital Twin Programme, there is one of the major documents that come out of that is called the Gemini Principles. So again, this is like beyond BIM, if you like, but Gemini Principles. Just to answer your question, if people are sort of on an earlier trajectory as far as BIM, certainly there's training courses out there. I offer them. This wasn't set up as a plug, but certainly there's online training.
There's
certainly online training courses. Yeah, I'm involved in lots of organizations. So just to say them first, Institution of Civil Engineers does it. BSI provides BIM training globally. So I'm involved with both of them. CIOB, Chartered Institute of Buildings, they define BIM training. I'm also involved with them. And then I also run BIM training. So one place to look is geoenable.com is the original website, and the website that's focused on training is bimenable.com. So that's bimenable.com. And we provide online and, when we can, face-to-face training as well. And often there's people there with, it's more awareness. I think this is the point where a lot of people don't want initially very detailed. They want an awareness. They need to know, as we've discussed, the terminologies, what could be meant by something. So I'm quite, I do go through the formal standards. These are focused on the formal standards, ISO 19650. It's a good place to start, but giving examples and maybe saying, this is how it is in the standard, but this is what people might think, or this is what people might say. So that's BIMenable.com. Another one, just to quickly plug, I'm also collaborating with Esri ESRI, which again is the global leader in mapping GIS solutions. And we have a combined 2-day course, which is at the moment obviously being delivered online. Again, there's information at geoenable.com and BIMenable.com. And so that's a 2-day course, which is new. This is the first time we're running it this year, where the first day is sort of me giving the setup to the broader aspects of BIM, the fact it's a process, a lot of the things that we've been talking about. And then the second day is focused on the Esri solution. So how might you practically, and that's particularly focused on people that have a GIS or geospatial background and their solutions. But most of my training isn't focused on specific solutions, but that one is. So yeah, UK BIM Alliance, UK BIM Framework, Centre for Digital Built Britain, and then if people want, there's also training through my company, BIMenable.com. And these things evolve. I think things like you're doing, so thanks for inviting me. I think people learn a great deal also, things like podcasts and videos, because it's a conversation. Certainly another place to look, I should say, this year, so May, June and July of this year, I've been involved in the Festival of BIM and Digital Construction.
Yeah, sure.
So I was fortunate enough so I also hosted so again, people can provide, I could provide a link if you want to put it in the description.
Yeah, sure, of course.
Yeah, they've got on-demand webinars and lots of them, and I've hosted some and I've spoke on others, but that's a great place to look.
I've watched a dozen of them.
Yeah, and they're great. So that's another online resource I'd recommend.
But for more specific skills, do we agree that if someone is picking up, like a civil engineer, picking up with data science, like Power BI or something else, learning, would that help in his or her career? Or we don't still have the jobs for this kind of skills?
Well, it's a challenge, isn't it? Because I know people with sort of PhDs in BIM and masters, and it depends how things evolve. There's always going to be a place of very, very focused skill, but likewise, what we're seeing is a blended skills. But to directly answer your question, certainly analytics sort of immediately, let's say I could only recommend one course and someone doesn't have the time or the money to do sort of a degree level course. So if we just talk about something sort of more immediate in that way, certainly learning analytics. So there's business intelligence and analytics, the language around it, the capabilities, and there's different tools out there. Sort of Cognos, there's MicroStrategy, there's lots out there. Learning the language around that, I think, is absolutely vital, because that's like we've already talked about. I think that's where we're lacking. And then there seems to be a big gap between that and what people would call themselves a data science, where they're doing programming. There seems to be a gap. So I certainly understand data science, but I wouldn't describe myself, at least at this point in time, as a data science, because I'm not a coder. I'm not a developer. I understand. I did used to do some development, but so if that's at the moment what we mean by data science, I think there's a gap there. But I'd certainly focus on things like analytics and have an awareness of AI, have an awareness of machine learning, the terminologies around it, what the capabilities are. Sorry,
and basic, know what involves, but there are no jobs yet like this, right? Like, let's say if I start searching this, I learn these skills, and I can showcase something. I can get the asset owner, and I can show him or her, you have this building. I can analyze it and give you this information. This might be a backdoor kind of career.
Well, I think you're right in the sense that you show if BIM feeds into, so BIM's about many things, but it feeds into making decisions, improving decision making. Right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of things to get there, but that's one of the things. And improved processes. These are skills that are already mature in the sense that process. You talked about analytics, absolutely. So again, I guess it's because I have a background in mapping and GIS. Then I would always think about presenting the data. You know, my first professional job, I was a cartographer, as a professional map maker. That's my background. So in a way, I'm always thinking, how might I present this data, and not necessarily on a map. And I think a lot of people don't think that. So it's good that you're talking about, you call out analytics there. A lot of people aren't thinking, oh, how might this look on a graph? Or so that's statistics. Even taking a step back, how you would get there, even forgetting the presentation just for a moment, that is statistical thinking. So some awareness around statistics, around metadata or data quality, around data presentation. Just data presentation. I talk about analytics and BI. It might be easier to search maybe just on data presentation. There might be more, let's say, more accessible tools to get into initially. And then as soon as you've been handling data, so again, certainly a lot of my earlier career was actually having to clean data, find the data, so tabulated data, cleanse the data, check the data, validate the data, prepare the data, link the data. Like I've done hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of hours of, so for example, the way a date is written within a field would be inconsistent. So I've had first-hand experience of inconsistencies of data. So I think there's something around when you present data, when you actually do it, then you suddenly realize you need consistent, good data. Yeah. Or it doesn't work. So I think you're right. I think that's one of I think that's a great example to look at analytics and data presentation.
Did you use a specific tool?
And there's a lot more to it. And the only other one, I mean, there's 100 things people could look at. Obviously, look at the standards, get some BIM training, but also process improvement. Again, that's a very mature separate topic, is process improvement. But that's what we're trying to do with modern technologies and modern ways of working, is improve processes. So things like Six Sigma, Lean, again, people don't have to do this, but just have an awareness of the fact that it's often very helpful, at the least, to map out processes as far as where information comes from, goes to. And when you think of a process, you think of inputs and outputs. By definition, that is a process. You input something, maybe we're talking about data, and you output something else, and that could be a dashboard, it could be more data, it could be, so focus on processes, I think, as well.
Yeah. Well, Steven, this was a wonderful conversation. Thank you very much for coming along. I learned a lot of new things today, and I'm really grateful to you for this.
Thank you. Thanks for your time. Thanks for inviting me. And it's like I say, it's in development. There's an evolution. There's a progression. So the journey is ongoing. So I'm sure in a year's time we can have this similar conversation and compare the changes.
Yeah, it would be amazing to see some big changes in this in the next 12 months.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Welcome. Thank you.